And you've been very good. You've done a very good job at spreading yourself in, lots of different tables. So what I wanted to ask is, that session we run it. We can run it in many different ways with many different people. So it would be very useful to know, as we are a small group, we can do that, who you are, and what you work on, because I can customize a little bit, the examples to whatever kind of works for you. So maybe let's start here.
Okay, yes, I'm Carlos. I'm from Ecuador. I used to be part of the ecosystem builder, but now I'm founder. I'm very attracted to this thing that is testing. That testing policy is like having this mindset that we are teaching the entrepreneurs how to apply into the policy.
That's good. So that at the end. And actually, do we have a microphone? Because I'm not sure other people can hear with all the noise.
Hi, Yvette Banfield with the Coalition, stands for the Coalition for Nonprofit Housing and Economic Development, based in Washington, D.C. And I consider myself as an ecosystem builder, working with the various entities that serve small businesses.
Sounds good. We're doing a very quick round of introductions. We're a small group, so it's actually good to get to know each other a little bit.
Hi, everybody. My name is Safaya Fauzi. I'm a program manager at the National League of Cities, which is based in Washington, D.C. We support cities, towns, and villages to strengthen their, in the case of the program, I work on policies to support entrepreneurs, especially underrepresented entrepreneurs. So great to meet everyone.
And actually, it's useful if you can hear what other people are saying, because one thing I'm going to ask you is, I know you're very comfortably seated, but is to move around after we've done this round of introductions, so that you sit in a table with someone that is working in a similar area that you are working on. That will make it much more productive conversation. So keep an eye when to see there are people that you like to kind of share a table with. So let's go here now. So just who you are, what do you work on, very briefly, 30 seconds.
Hi, I'm Shelley Klingerman. I am from Terre Haute, Indiana, so local. And I work with a creative agency helping entrepreneurs tell their stories and also influence legislation when necessary.
I'm Lauren Washington. I currently live in Buffalo, New York, and I run the University at Buffalo Startup Accelerator. We invest $100,000 into startups within the Western New York community. We have incubator space and mentorship as well.
Naturally, I'm listening, but I'm going to grab a piece of paper to remember all the things that you work.
Hi, my name is Jen Pearl, and I'm with the Bloomington Economic Development Corporation. We are based 1 hour south of here, and our role is to attract and grow quality jobs for our community, particularly for more mature companies. And we also need to be able to grow wages and population in our area.
Hi, I'm Kim Betcher from Washington, D.C., and I work on policy dialogue in emerging markets.
So let's go with that.
Hello, my name is Luis Lira. I spent the last 15 years developing the startup ecosystem in Peru. And as of Monday, I started a new position as executive director for an NGO that is promoting impact investment in Peru. So new to the role, happy to chat.
Hello, my name is Tom Solomon. I work for the Institute for Justice, which is based in Washington, D.C. We're a nonprofit civil rights organization, and I work specifically on our Cities Work initiative, which helps reduce regulatory barriers in cities for entrepreneurship.
Hello, my name is Andrea. I am from Guatemala, and I consider myself an ecosystem builder. I also work with local governments to develop enabling environments for entrepreneurship and innovation. And then I've also worked in establishing long-term interventions like the Venture Capital Association of Central America and the Caribbean, and as well measuring tools for entrepreneurial ecosystem effectiveness. You can see one of the models out there. That's mine.
Hi guys, my name is Mallory St. Clair. I am the Impact Manager. impact manager at the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs. I'm based out of DC, but I am actually born in Indianapolis and raised in the suburbs up north.
So it was difficult to convince you to come here, yeah?
Hello, my name is Kevin Ford. I'm an economic developer for the city of Kalamazoo in Southwest Michigan. I help to create and facilitate equitable opportunities for people, for neighborhoods, and for businesses to thrive.
Hey, that's right. Hello. Oh, let me get away from that. Hello, my name is Tanya McNeil Weary. I'm the founder of the Michigan Association for Female Entrepreneurs. And what we do, we're a nonprofit organization that works to ensure that women entrepreneurs in Michigan have equal access to resources and tools they need to grow and scale their companies.
Hello, everyone. I'm testing it out. I'm Latanya Barber. I am the chief event organizer for Eloquet's Event Enterprise. We've been around for 27 years, based out of Detroit, Michigan. I'm really excited about the launch of our nonprofit, my nonprofit, I should say, which is called Deaf Unite. It is an organization that is an advocate for deaf and hard of hearing people, where we're bridging the gap for the hearing communities as well.
So we have had doing a quick round of introductions. You are new and you are new. You've done it exactly. You are, and there's someone else there. Yeah.
Sure.
So
This is just an introduction. I
Yes.
just moved in now. Okay, my name is Rajiv Hiralal. I'm from Suriname, a country that speaks Dutch in South America. I own a startup that, well, it's not technically a startup, but a software company that I started when I was a student 13 years ago. And in that process, decided to also support a more mature innovation ecosystem in my country. So now I also have kind of informal role of ecosystem builder. Thank you.
And there is one last final comer right here, yeah? Just very quickly, who you are, where you come from.
Hi, I'm Brian. I'm from here, and I've started a couple companies, sold one of them in the medical space. Now I'm working on a health and wellness company here and a cannabis company in Illinois that's going to be a producer.
Okay, so what I'm going to ask you now is, at some point, the hope is to make this participatory. I'll be telling you a few things about what we do. And let me grab the clicker. But it'd be great if tables of one are not great for teamwork. So if those of you that sit alone, or you've seen someone that you're actually working the same thing and you just kind of won, let's ensure that there are at least 2-3 people in each table, so that we can have a useful conversation in each of those. So what's the plan for today? We have a very mixed audience, so I'll try to do my best to ensure that it's relevant to all of them. I'll give you a little bit of an intro about what who I am, who we are. I'll give you an intro of what do we mean by test and learn, by experimental approaches, why do we think are important. A little bit of work on why, when we think about experimenting, we have to think about evidence. And then hopefully we'll get our hands dirty thinking about how you could use experiments in the problems that you have in front of you. And your problems are different, so we're going to be asking you to think about the issue you want to work on. Then we'll talk a little bit about how you can use data to assess it. But then ideally, and we'll see if we can get there, we'll look at what could be a simple experiment that you could set up to test a solution to the problem that you are working on. So that's the plan for today. Let's see how it goes. So IGL is a global policy lab for more impactful innovation and productivity policies. We basically sit in the middle of the policy community on the one hand and the research community. We have a bunch of governments that are members of IGL that basically want to make their policies more effective. And then we also have a large research network with over 250 researchers that care about collaborating with practitioners, collaborating with industry, collaborating with policymakers, with ecosystem builders, to develop useful evidence and to ensure that the research they do has actually impact in the real world. So our belief is that policies, programs, organizations are much more effective if they are agile, if they are experimental, if they are data-driven, if they are evidence-based. So I often joke that if we look at the policies that governments use to support science, innovation, entrepreneurship, productivity, often they are not very scientific, not very innovative, not very entrepreneurial, and not very productive. So our role with AGL is to try to change that. We are in it for the long term. So what does it mean? A lot of organizations are focused on outputs and measuring activities, not impacts. A lot of organizations are quite conservative, really stay in the status quo, in the comfort zone. We like to see them much more curious, asking them, the kind of what if they do things differently. Many organizations are very afraid of failing, and they are paralyzed by a fear of failure. When actually we think that when you need to accept failure. The question is not to avoiding failure. That's the best way to ensure that you fail totally, if you never try anything new, but rather to manage risks and to be comfortable managing risks, and also have a little bit of humbleness. Lots of organizations are convinced that what they're doing is the right thing. And one of the things we think, there is kind of overconfidence that, yes, that's the program, that will work. And I've talked to a few people, and we think, actually, you need to think much more experimental, saying, we think that's a good idea. Let's try it out if it works in the real time. Something where we also see lots of margin for improvement is how do organizations learn? And this is applied to private sector, public sector, ecosystem organizations. In many of organizations, learning is an afterthought. Even there is no evaluation, or it's something that 3 years later your founder comes in and says, hey, demonstrate the impact you had, and then you quickly look at the data and see what stories you can come up with and what big numbers you can put in a very nice glossy report. We think that it's important to think that organizations should be kind of learning by design, in the center, and we see big corporates doing it, but we don't typically see government agencies or ecosystem organizations, support organizations doing much of that. And ultimately, there is something about doing this in the open, sharing, learning. That's how we get most of it. So that's what we like to see. We've been working around the world. We've helped 50-plus organizations to set up their first experiments. We've supported a range of experiments and engaged with lots of policymakers. And we're trying to build a global community of people in the policy, in the practice, in the research side to really kind of work together to improve the evidence we have in this space and have better policies and programs. So what do? We help organizations become experimental. We do lots of experimental research. We also do lots of work with data science and what can we do. And then we do the typical things that think tanks do in terms of bringing people together, in terms of doing policy analysis, in terms of ensuring that the evidence that is being generated actually gets used. It doesn't stay in a journal. And we do this in lots of areas, going from science, innovation, entrepreneurship, and business policies. But there are a few, and that's why partly was asking about interest, where we do much more work. One is science innovation funding, which I don't think anyone here is working on. Another one is thinking about how do you bridge, and people working in economic development, how do you bridge the world of universities and the world of industry? And how can you develop much more data-driven science commercialization? A third one is inclusive innovation. I hear quite a few of you mentioning organizations. There are lots of attempts to make create opportunity for women, for underprivileged groups to have more entrepreneurial, innovative careers, but there is very little evidence on what works and what doesn't, and that ensure that the dollars going there are not very not as impactful as they could be, but also it makes it much more difficult to make the case to funders that you should be supporting this work. And then we work a lot, also for those working on economic development, on how do you get small businesses to adopt technologies, management practices, and what works and what doesn't. We work in many places around the world, but probably I'll skip this, and I guess just focus on what do we mean by test and learn, and why do you think is important. So if you look into your organizations, how do you make decisions? How do you inform your decisions? What inputs go into these decisions? Typically, it will be a mix of intuition, stories. An entrepreneur will have to tell you, this is something I should really be doing. Or I've seen in Silicon Valley that this was very effective and I want to do it in my ecosystem. We've been doing this program and people say they are very happy. And then there is data and evidence. Our view is that right now, if you look at the most of the organizations that we, most of the organizations that we typically engage with when they start, that's how they derive decisions. It's a combination of intuition and stories. Data and evidence are used a little bit, but not as much as they should. We believe that making good decisions, making good programs, good policies, is knowing how to combine them. None of this has the answer on its own. The good judgment is knowing how to combine effectively intuition, data, stories, case studies, and evidence. And just to tell you the size of the prize, I'm sorry, we are based in Europe, so I don't have the data for the US. But in Europe, European governments invest 150 billion euros every year in programs to support entrepreneurs and businesses to innovate and grow. The challenge with this funding, if you look at the productivity statistics, the fact is quite mixed, to be kind. And part of that is, there are lots of questions. That we should be asking ourselves. And that applies to Europe, but it applies to the US, and it applies to each and every of the organizations that you run, based on what you've said. Are we getting the most from this investment? Do we actually, apply to what we preach? We are telling companies that they should be entrepreneurial, they should be innovative, that they should do R&D. Do we do that in-house? Typically, we don't. Or do we test in the way that we expect researchers and innovations to do? So, why experimentation? First, let me maybe do a starting point, which is to say, what is an experiment? We talked to a lot of organizations, and they told us, yes, we're experimenting. Look, last year we tried this. 2 years ago we tried that. This year we are trying this. So, very often an experiment is, for many people, is trying something new. But actually, I'm not a native English speaker. I'm sure that by now you already know that. But if you look at the dictionary, and I think American English and British English are still on this word the same, an experiment is a test done in order to learn something or to discover if something works or is true. So an experiment needs to have learning as a priority. You are intentionally testing something in a way that is structured and within a set of timeframes. And I say this because very often we hear organizations, yes, I'm running experiments, but if you haven't put in place the systems to learn, to evaluate it, and there are multiple ways of learning it, that's not really an experiment. That might be a pilot, that might be trying something, but that, crucially, that will not be very useful. Because you are trying something, but you're not really learning whether it's working. And if you don't think this in advance of doing the experiment, you are unlikely to learn as much as you could. So, why do we think that experiments are important? In any of your organizations, you are running programs where there are lots of options in the menu. You could do lots of different things, and you could do them in very different ways. So the typical way that organizations work is, okay, yeah, there is this full menu of things I could be doing, and I'm just going to pick one instead of and go ahead with this one. Instead of considering, could other options have been more effective? Are there some things that we could be doing? Are we, how can we be confident that we are making the most impact that we, the highest impact that we could? So, our approach is that, and we didn't invent this, a lot of people have been doing it, is to sort of try to encourage organizations to move from the more kind of traditional approach to more experimental. So how is the traditional approach of policymaking? A challenge will be identified. The government or the organization will bring a bunch of very smart people, typically on the room, to give ideas. They will come up with the best design, and then you'll have a minister or a governor or a secretary announcing the new program to digitalize businesses in Indiana. And that will be one program, one design, and that's crucially, you'll just hope that it works. So to me, that's the hope strategy. It's, you do things and you hope it's going to work. What's the alternative approach? The alternative approach is, start small, try different designs systematically, see what works, and then scale it up. This is an idea that, as I said, we didn't invent. Many people have been using it, and particularly, this is an idea that has been used a lot in developing countries to see what works to reduce poverty. So much and so effectively that these three guys, Abhijit Banerjee, Esther Duflo, Michael Kremer, won a Nobel Prize in economics for it. So what we're suggesting is, do what the Nobel Prize winners are doing as a way of ensuring that, you have better policies. So, what are the benefits of becoming experimental? One thing, if you keep asking yourself, what if? You are much more likely to come up with new solutions to the policy challenges, the program challenges that you face. There is also one way of experimentation is one way of the risking. When I talk to people that say, no, experimentation is risky. Actually, what risky is is to not experiment. Experimentation is a very useful way to the risk. So we had a government we were working with that was launching a big program that was costing them, tens of millions of dollars. And they were running it as an experiment. And someone asked the director in the government, or the top civil servant, say, what if the experiment doesn't work, if it fails? And his answer, which was brilliant, was to say, actually, we will have saved a lot of money. We're planning to spend, $500 million a year on this program for the foreseeable future. If this year we're spending 20 million, 30 million, it shows it doesn't work. Well, we are saving $500 million a year for the foreseeable future. So it's shifting the mindset from experimenting is risky to experimenting actually is one way of the risking your programs. It's one way of improving continuously. Experimentation is not only a one-off exercise. It's a culture of continuously testing out how you could do things better. One thing that finance ministers and budget like a lot is experiments tend to be time limited. You try something new, and then you see if it works. If it works, you scale it up. If it doesn't, you see if you have to redesign it and do it again, or you have to close it down. But we know, and all of you working in organizations and with the public sector, you'll be familiar that with all these programs that have very questionable impacts that continue forever and ever and ever. So experimentation is one way to say no. The things that continue should be the ones that work. The ones that don't work doesn't make sense to continue them. So ultimately, it's about better decisions and saving money. So, if you think about your organizations, what's required to be experimental? One thing is the mindset, and I think that's a crucial ingredient. Is whenever you are designing a program, running a program, considering what you should be, how you should, what can you do to improve the program, is to ask yourself the what if. What if I do this? What if? Sorry, you want to take a picture? Let me move out. What if I do this? What if I try something else? What if we radically think? Oh, okay, it seems that I cannot move too far away from here. Sorry for the pictures, I'll be there. Apologies, that's not the nicest one to have. So the mindset. The other thing is the culture. How does your organization create the space and the processes and the openness to failure to try out new things and fail? How comfortable are you? It would be your boss if you were to go to them and say, no, we tried this, it was small scale, it didn't work, we'll try something different. That's the space that needs to be created. And then there is the method. How do you learn from those experiments? And here there are lots of different ways of doing it. So, at AGL, we tend to think that whenever you're experimenting, you have to think about, defining and exploring the problem very well. Don't jump into a solution. That's a typical issue that we see. Then, design and plan the intervention, pilot and test. And sometimes this pilot and testing is a smaller scale experiment. Sometimes it's, larger scale experiments. And then learn and try to scale what works. So, the idea of experimentation can help you in very different phases when you are developing a program or a policy. It can help you to understand, when you still don't know the solutions, to understand the problem and really understand the rationale of the intervention. It can help you test different mechanisms that the intervention, that the program you're running can work through. It can help you to optimize the delivery. Amazon will do, Microsoft, all the big tech companies will do tens of thousands of experiments every year to just see how things work and continuously improving. Or it may be you may want to use experiments when you already have a solution and you really have to demonstrate to your funders that this solution is working. One of the challenges is how we learn from these experiments. And here, there are many different ways to evaluate experiments and policies, and the challenge is that very often we do it in the way that is not very robust. And that may seem academic as an academic exercise, but actually it matters in real time. So some colleagues at the London School of Economics in the UK did a study of all the evaluations they could find of local economic growth schemes. And they looked at 15,000 of those evaluations, and they asked how many of these evaluations are good enough to convince someone that does not agree on the policy. So you have evaluations where you evaluate a policy, and you would basically do a satisfaction survey. You ask the entrepreneurs, were you happy about the support you got? Was the money I gave you helpful? Would you have done the same thing without the money? And the entrepreneurs will typically be very nice and say, yes, the program was helpful. Yes, please give me money because I want to get in. And yes, the money was crucial. Even without the money, I wouldn't have done it. But we don't necessarily know that this is actually the case in reality. So this group of researchers basically ask how many of the evaluations are good enough to convince someone that disagrees. Because there are evaluations that are good enough to convince the people who already agree that the policy is good, and that the people who disagree that the policy or the program is good, they will just find holes in it. It's like, yeah, this is because you only asked them this, or this is because you only looked at the because the companies that applied for innovation funding were already the best ones, and that's why they've done better, not because of you or your support, it's because you've just taken the creme de la creme, you've just taken the top ones, and that's. So of these 15,000 evaluations, how many of those you think they satisfy this criteria for being robust, good enough to convince someone that disagrees with it? Any guesses in the room? 20%, sorry? 5% here? Any other takers? 0? 5 here? Any other? So you've been optimistic. 2.4%. And of those 2.4%, only 1 in 4 showed positive. Just say 1 in 4. I think it's 1 in 4. Yeah, showed positive impact in employment. So this is the state of the evidence. And if you look at innovation schemes, you get the same picture. So what it is that makes an evaluation credible? To measure impact, you need to compare. If you basically, the only thing that you are doing is, I've supported, I ran an accelerator program, and identified the top, I did pick the top 20 startups, and then at the end of the program, or at the end of the following year, I asked them, okay, those 20, are these startups doing better than the ones that did not get into the program or did not apply into the program? Here you are confounding two different effects. You are saying, you are picking up those that there may be an effect of the program, but also the companies that you had in the companies you had in the program were the best ones, so that's why they are also doing better. So it doesn't really help you tell the difference between having had the program or not having had. So no, in a good design experiments, you basically need to think about how you create a comparison group, something to compare it with. And here there are multiple ways of doing it. There is some fancy econometrics, and here we have a professor that is very good at this, at doing that. Or you can do, you can test policies like you test vaccines. So, or you test, antibiotics, which is to say, we have some companies, some individuals that will get one treatment, and some other companies that will get a different treatment. This is not a theoretical exercise, or this kind of academic. Sometimes we like to get our people's lives difficult. This is just an example of a pilot that we supported, where they ran. This was a business training program with SMEs in England. Something that many of your organizations probably run with. And then what they did is when they wanted the research team here decided to do the evaluation in two different ways to compare them. The first way was to say, okay, we have these companies that we are training. Let's look at other companies that are similar, but are not part of the training, but they are the same sector, the same size, the same age, and let's see whether we can see an effect. And that's what you see on the left-hand side of the graph. And you saw that the companies, the small businesses that had gotten to the program and had training were doing better. Whether, were doing better than the ones that didn't. Well, on the other hand, they also ran this as an experiment, where they say, rather than looking for similar companies from the data, we had lots of people applying, we did a lottery, some got into the program, some didn't. And then when they did an experiment, you could see basically almost no difference between those groups. So getting good evidence may sound like an academic exercise, but if you have poor evidence, you conclude that you should be investing money into this, and you'll be throwing dollars down the drain, when actually in reality it doesn't work. So, that's one of the things, that yes, having glossy numbers that you can put, having big numbers that you can put in a very nice glossy case study at the end of the year is helpful to make your case. But if the program is having not effective, it's basically ensuring that you are spending money in a way that doesn't work. So I'll skip through this because I've already talked to. So what are kind of ways of learning? There are multiple ways. One way that we use a lot at AGL is the idea of randomized control trials. So what do you do with a vaccine? Or with you have some companies, some entrepreneurs, some individuals that get one treatment, and you have another group that gets a different treatment or nothing, and then you see what happens. You use a lottery. You have a population of companies. You use a lottery. Then some get the treatment, some get the control, or get a different treatment. You wait, and you see what happens at the end. And this is the way that we have COVID vaccines. This is the way that health has evolved. This is the way that lots of education research and social policy has also improved. This is still quite unusual in entrepreneurship and business support. So just to give you an example of an experiment that I like a lot, and to see how good you are at guessing the impacts. Here is a program that a group of researchers and organizations did in China a few years ago now, where they randomized, when they sort of said, look, to support businesses, we were typically economic development organizations. Lots of it is, we try to train them. And what they said is actually, let's try something different. Let's see if they can learn from each other. So they created these kind of groups of businesses, and they asked them, and they organized meetings where for a year, the 10 managers would meet once a month to change how they worked. So there was no training in there. There was just a facilitator in the room to help run the conversation. And for a month, for a year, once a month, they kept talking. They did this as an experiment, which means they had 2,800 firms that were interested. Half of those got into the treatment group, and joined these monthly meetings. The other half were told, sorry, we have no space, we're at capacity for this year, come back next year, and they were in the control group. And then they measured lots of different things. So what do you think happened? Do you think that there were some changes but no impact on sales? Or do you think that just meeting once a month with other businesses actually had an impact on sales? You say A? A here, okay. Any takers? Anyone else? Any other views in the site? A or B? A, and here, A or B? Okay, that's why experiments are useful, because they challenge priors. So it actually increased sales by 8%. If you look at the companies that were in the treatment group and at the companies that were in the control group, just this intervention, once a month, meeting, talking to each other, their sales went up by 8%. This paper is published in the top economic journals. We were not involved in it, but it's a very nice example of sometimes of two things. One is all your priors, as well as my priors. I can tell you that because I saw this paper before, this trial before it went to the field, and I said, that's not going to work. And I was wrong. Now, we can be wrong, and the only way of testing and finding out whether our priors are right is to test them in the real world. And in that case, our priors, but also my priors, but also quite a few others here were not the right ones. This very simple intervention had an effect. The other bit that is interesting here is this is the kind of intervention that is not very common, or I mean, that people do, but not really in a structured way. And this kind of it was much more impactful than many of the interventions that we do where we put trainers to go and talk to businesses. So the researchers sort of try to look at what, try to go a little bit into detail and try to understand not just this is work or not, but why, what is it happening? And then they sort of measured some intermediate outcomes and say, can we see something in having in the clients, in access to credit, in management scores, or is it simply that just that it helped on getting some more clients, but really nothing else improved? Any views here? Any brave one that wants to say A or well, actually B? Here's the. What they found is that that intervention actually helped the companies get more clients, get more access to credit, and improve their management practices. And then they also asked, does the composition of these teams make a difference? These meetings. Do you think the composition makes a difference? Do you think that so whether you are kind of in your group, you have lots of companies that are very similar to you, that you relate a lot, versus you have some companies that are very different from you, much larger than you. What is best for these groups? Sorry? B? Here? A, just to some contrarians. So, actually A. The diversity, having the diversity was helpful, and in this case, having the experience of peers that were larger, that were more structured, helped them to learn. This is just an example of how you can do experiments to evaluate a policy. This is a very nice example. It's a paper published in a top journal, but but actually there are many different ways that you can do it. So, and I'll give you a few more examples now. But if you're thinking about this idea of doing experiments, as I was saying, sometimes you are comparing a treatment and a control. Some companies get something, some others don't. Sometimes you're comparing different treatments. Some entrepreneurs are getting online training, some entrepreneurs are getting face-to-face training. Some are getting funding, some are getting funding plus a mentor. There are lots of different things that you can be comparing. And you can use them for evaluation. You can use them to optimize. Many of the, there is this old saying that there is no plan that resists the first encounter with the enemy. And I think many of the programs that we develop have similar challenges. We can have grand plans, grand ideas, but execution is, and the details sometimes is the difference between a success and failure. So you can run experiments to optimize those details to see what works best. And then you can also use it to understand what the underlying causes and mechanisms are for that program. So to give you an experiment, one of the things, an example, sorry. One of the challenges that many organizations care about is how to encourage collaboration. And that can be collaboration between scientists and businesses, collaboration between businesses. And here, just to give you an example, one of the questions that one academic in our network, in our scientific committee, asked is how much friction there is in creating collaboration. So do collaborations happen naturally, or you should be thinking about interventions to encourage, facilitate, foster collaborations? And in that case, the setting where they did this experiment was at the Harvard Medical School. They sort of say, if you want to apply to this funding competition and you're a researcher, you have to come to this information session. Rather than just submitting your application, you have to come to this information session. And in this information session, they did a little bit what they did at the beginning, like force people to move around, sit in tables, and they basically ask people, force people to talk to each other. So they put them in groups and ask them, talk to each other. And then they looked, did the people that they put in the same table actually, ended up applying together for projects? And this tweak in a process, and that's a very small tweak in a process, almost doubled the probability of new collaborations. And just to give you a sense of who the people in the room were, we are not talking about an intervention here that was trying to get different companies to talk to each other, or companies and researchers to talk to each other, or researchers from different universities to talk to each other. These were all researchers from the Harvard Medical School eating at the same canteen. And even though for this group of relatively homogeneous people, very well-connected people, and very, that know each other, a small tweak in the process made a difference. Imagine now, on some of the interventions that you're doing in economic development, where you're trying to get people to collaborate, you're trying to bring entrepreneurs together. How, I'm not saying this is a solution, because obviously every context is different, but just how sometimes a small friction, a small change in the process will tell you something about the problem you're trying to fix and may also have quite an impact. And in that case, the problem was like, what you learn about it is a potential intervention, but also that the frictions that exist are huge. And that you may want to think about different ways to reduce those frictions so that collaboration happens. There are a lot of experiments now I will not go through because the list is really long about who benefits from AI. Is AI benefiting the best performing people in a company? Is AI benefiting the least performing people in the company? The jury is still out, but that's another area where there are a lot of experiments happening. You can also think of, going back to kind of optimizing processes, but in a way that have impact. One of the challenges that, and I know some of you care about, is how do we increase access to funding for women entrepreneurs? We know that, that they get less funding, and typically the answer to this is, let's train women to pitch more, to pitch better, or to be precise, to pitch more like men. So be more ambitious, be more bold. There is some evidence that the average, and I know the averages can be very misleading, obviously there is everything everywhere, but on the average, if you have a research proposal, a scientific research proposal written by a man, that basically will cure cancer. And, and women will identify the mechanism that allows the molecule to identify a treatment. This is a little bit of an exaggeration, but there is actually some evidence of, how bold statements. I know some groups make bold statements, and the answer that we very often think about this is, okay, let's train women to pitch better or to pitch more in a way more ambitious, more bolder, more. What these researchers from the network did was to say, actually, instead of changing the seeker and saying, no, the problem is women doing this or that, it's not. They're actually being honest. Let's change the system. And what they did is they realized, they studied, and they looked, and they partnered with an accelerator program that was doing lots of pitching competitions, and they basically sat in the room and they codified all the questions that the judges were asking to the entrepreneurs. And what they saw is that the judges were typically asking, on average, and as I say, the averages, can be misleading. The averages, they are averages. They don't give you the full picture. But what they saw was that women. Male-led startups got more questions about the opportunity, the size of the prize, how great it is, and women-led startups got more questions about the risks, the downsides. Are you sure it's going to work? So what they did was to say, okay, can we tweak the process a little bit? And the way they tweak the process here was to say, look, we are going to give an interview guide, and we're going to basically force judges to ask some of the same questions to both men and women, and that reduced the bias a lot. I'm not saying this is a solution. Context matters, everything, but that's just an example where a small tweak in the way you're delivering a policy can have an important impact. Another example comes from the UK, and it relates to one of the challenges that many programs and many economic development programs have, which is getting companies to take on it. We offer a lot of programs. I don't know some of you, but sometimes we offer training programs, we offer super accelerators, and in some of them we get lots of applicants that want to participate, and in some others we don't get much of that. And I'm always amazed how many programs that governments set out fail to hit the targets of an ecosystem of support organizations that they were expecting to hit. There is always a bit of an overconfidence of how many people you would take. So in that case, the UK Business Ministry sort of decided, let's start to experiment on how we get people to apply. And this is very similar in the same way that American Express or MasterCard or Visa or Bank of America will send you, regular emails with some messages that have been tested and customized to get you to get more credit or buy this credit card or buy more or whatever. In that case, they decide to test different types of messages that to get companies to apply to a voucher scheme that the government was running. And in some cases, it was like emphasizing the amount of the voucher. In some other cases, it was emphasizing the social aspect of it. Everyone else doing it, you don't want to miss out. In some other cases, was reminding them that they were, that there was a deadline. In some other cases, it was to tell them that they were chosen, they were selected for that. And those combination of messages, the difference between the worst message and the last message implied another 9,000 people, 9,000 businesses applying to the trial. So that's the difference between failure and success in a policy. And then we can also think about impact evaluation, and here is you can do a lot of experiments to really evaluate what you're trying to do. So, for instance, many governments have vouchers that they give to businesses to, for instance, buy knowledge services from universities. So we did partner with the UK Innovation Agency to set it up as an experiment, which meant companies did apply for the voucher. There was more demand than supply, so they did a lottery. Some companies got the voucher, some didn't, and then you saw what happened. And the companies that got the voucher were more likely to be collaborating with universities. Interestingly, and we are doing this for the UK right now, but it has also been done for the Netherlands, they also had a similar scheme, and they went back 7-8 years later. And they asked, was getting a voucher 7 years ago, a $10,000 voucher to collaborate with a university, did this have an impact in, can you see any impact later on, several years later? And, what was, to be fair, surprising is that this small amount of money actually made that 7 years later, those companies that had won the lottery had higher survival, were using more R&D tax credits, were doing more R&D activities, and had more employment and productivity. Yeah. Oh, actually, yeah. I should forgot to say. Please interrupt me. I'm tired of talking.
Thank you. Quick question about this. How did you guys tease out the fact that the performance was based on that voucher? How did you measure and distinguish the attribution versus contribution?
Very good question. We used a lottery to give the voucher. Well, actually, the government used a lottery, which meant companies applied. The ones that were not eligible, they were taken out of the pile, and among all those eligible, it was literally lottery. Some got it, some not. That means statistically, those two groups are the same. If the sample is big enough, you know that any difference that appears from those groups basically comes from the intervention, because on any other measure, they are the same. They didn't select themselves into the program. So that's the beauty of an experiment. You don't have to worry too much about how to do it if you have enough sample. That comes a difficult econometrics question now.
So I think this is an excellent design, and we learn a lot from it, and we also test our intuitions. But following up upon that question, it might also be that this innovation voucher triggered R&D for the majority of firms that got the voucher, and that R&D makes a difference. But there are a few firms that don't do R&D with this that do not do R&D with the voucher. So there might be sort of intermediate variables that make a difference as well.
Totally,
I guess. But
yeah, no. I mean, we know that the voucher kicked off something. We didn't know whether it was. So the impact of the voucher may be the voucher itself, or the fact that it kicked off something, and these things, had lots of different impacts.
So it shows that it works, but we still have to find out how it works.
One of the examples of the voucher, one of the questions you can ask on innovation vouchers. I know when you're doing this, you always want to look at the data, but you also want to actually talk to people. So you want to combine, data with talking and qualitative. You can think of vouchers also. There are two theories about why businesses and universities don't work together as much as policymakers think they should. You talk to any policymaker and they will tell, we have great science, but our business is not collaborating enough. We're not commercializing it. One theory of thought is that they don't know each other. And if you do a voucher, they get to know each other, and then things happen. Another school of thought says, it's not that they don't know each other, it's they don't like each other. And that's a much more difficult one to fix. It's like, if you pay them every time, they will collaborate. But when you withdraw the money, they will stop collaborating. Here, the evidence is mixed. We have examples where we see that, after the voucher, collaboration appears, and that's, I guess, the Dutch. We have examples where after the voucher, the collaboration stops, which is to say, if you subsidize it, they'll continue doing it. if you don't subsidize it, they'll have known each other, but they still don't want to work with each other.
Perhaps another follow-on question. So this does a wonderful job to show whether one intervention in one context works or doesn't work. But I happen to know the background of this innovation voucher, which was a situation in the Netherlands in which there was too little, at least from the perception, interaction of SMEs to universities. So do you also know of these kind of experiments that have been repeated in multiple contexts to see how the context differs? So I can imagine if you would do this in the Cambridgeshire area, it wouldn't have an effect because most SMEs would have collaboration anyway.
I mean, I remember once hosting a delegation from Boston, and I think it was the mayor of Boston or the head of innovation of the Boston City Council saying, we have a problem in Boston. We have lots of amazing science, but we don't have enough commercialization. So, this one actually we've tried in 2 different countries. Well, different people have tried in different countries, but you can always kind of dig in, and definitely context matters a lot. So, you don't mean, yeah. Context matters. I would say even in Cambridge and Oxford, that could be effective, but you can always drill down into the data. So, and I'm getting to the end of me talking, but oh, sorry, I didn't see you. Apologies.
Oh, thank you so much for the presentation. I understand the importance and the need to evaluate for impact. Many of us here, I think, have very small teams and very limited resources, and often don't have the luxury of kind of the lead-in to starting something new. We have to respond very quickly to things in the market. How do you actually operationalize this, especially when you're limited on time and resources?
So you've kind of gone a few slides ahead, but that's actually perfectly fine. The reason why this is difficult to do, there is time, resources, pressure. You need to show results right now. Some of the things require substantial time and resources, and they say, if you don't have them, that may not be the right place to do it. Some of those are actually require an afternoon of work. So experimenting with your newsletter, like we work with the Austrian government, and the first time we started with the Austrian Innovation Agency, they started an experiment. And really, the first experiments that we started doing were about evaluation, how do we get our newsletter more effective? How do we draw more content? And they saw that these small experiments actually have an impact. So there are experiments that require capacity and resource, and there are some that are easy to embed. One of the things with resources is that there are a bunch of academics out there, and now I'm going to call you free labor, that if the opportunity is interesting, they will be happy to collaborate with any ecosystem support organization if they can do research that will get them an academic paper. So even if you don't have the resource, there are external academics that will be, and we've seen this in developing countries a lot with researchers partnering with NGOs to help different programs to alleviate poverty. So you can say, look, I'm very busy, I don't have resource, I have a team, I'm going to support this. This is the intervention I'm going to test. Can I find someone that wants to collaborate with me? And they'll do that. I mean, every context is different, and I always emphasize that. But that's I guess another one. A third one is the fact that you have to start large from the beginning. It's like, I love this idea of doing a small scale pilot, and then and I do one pilot and then I scale it up, and then. But in practice, I have a governor, I have a minister, I have a mayor that tells me I should be a CEO, I should be doing this, and I should do it now. And I've promised I will be going to target 10,000 companies in the next 2 years. What you're suggesting me goes against my political will. And here, the answer to that sometimes is to say, okay, that's true, but and we saw that with the COVID vaccines actually, where there was no much, and the way they did was parallel experiments to say, look, we have to do a lot of things. I mean, we have to deliver. Ideally, we start small, and then we will, with the scale. But actually, alternatively, we could start large, but with different, 2-3 different versions on the things that we're not sure, and then learn from this, and then, in year 2, we move the people to the place where it's going. Every case is different. I mean, I don't know your context well enough, and we can talk a little bit more. But, yep.
Thank you so much. Sorry for all the questions.
No, that's much better. That's the plan.
I'm curious, do you feel there are any areas that this approach is not appropriate for, areas or sectors?
So just recollecting a conversation we did yesterday. Let's say you are doing cluster policy and you're deciding which universities, which technologies you want to build a cluster on or support a cluster on. That will not help you. Deciding whether the future of the cluster for your state is Internet of Things or is biotech or is whatever, that's totally, that will not help you. However, for instance, if you're using a cluster policy, deciding where to prioritize, technologies, sectors, that will not help you. However, that's the first level of question. The second layer of the question is, okay, you can do cluster policy or whichever, but cluster policy is a combination of small-scale instruments. And on those instruments that you're using, cluster policy is about financial incentives, is about creating connections, is about bringing people together, is about building infrastructure. On many of those, you can apply the approach. And just to give you, I guess, an example you can always decompose any policy that you're doing through a user journey or any program. And in that user journey, you can start asking yourself questions. So here is an example of a user journey, which is a funding call. Could be a funding call for research funding, for innovation funding. The first thing that you'll do is you will announce and promote the funding call, and you may give support to applicants. And the typical challenge here is having insufficient applicants. So here there are lots of different experiments that you could be doing, to see what features of the program people value, to see how you get more applicants from diverse backgrounds, for instance. Then at some point you need to go and assess proposals and select applicants. And here we know there are lots of biases in these processes, and we are running right now, as we speak, an accelerator program with a bunch of science innovation funders on how they can use AI in the peer review process to test different ways to use AI and whether it actually helps or hinders. So there are, we have a handbook full of ideas on that term, and eventually, you've selected, you give them the funding, but many projects don't go ahead. And the question here is, okay, for instance, was funding enough? Should I give them a mentor? Should I control how they are expecting, how they are spending the money? What do I do with the applicants I didn't support? Do I want them to apply next year? Do I want them to go and apply to something else? Or do I want them to stop applying because what they had is so terrible that they should stop wasting their time on this? So this is just, just speaking, and you can take any program that you are working on, and you'll see that, you can break it into pieces and you'll see that there are lots of questions where you could start experimenting in a way that it's not very hard and will give you insights. So I've talked a lot, more than I expected. We have time. We are very few, so I'm not sure how to do this. What would be useful is for all of us to now think about something to, I guess, land it into what you're working on, landing into day-to-day. And here, basically, what I would like to ask you is to think about, maybe we could kind of join ourselves in a few tables rather than being spread so thinly, take a program that you're working and think about an issue you like to work. And you can think of this from a challenge frame, which is what are the problems I have? I'm running this program and it's not working. A lot of startups are failing. Or I don't have applicants. Or what keeps you awake at night with what things are not working. Alternatively, you can think about the opportunity frame. I have this program. I'm bubbling with ideas of things that I could do differently. I don't know where to start. I'd like to start testing a few of those. So what I would like to do, and I'm not sure how to do it even, is, and maybe we can just sit on a table or on two tables, so the ones that here. And for all of you to think for like a minute or two on a program that you're running, and an issue that you like to work on. So maybe introduce each other. You already talked about, And then literally just think for what could be a challenge, an opportunity that you have in front of you that you like to think more about. Yep.
Evaluating a program that exists.
This is something that you are thinking about.
Right.
One issue that you like to understand better, where it's ideas that you have to do things differently, or challenges that you like. It is not so much about evaluation, but.
I see. That makes sense. Thank you.
Really.
Funders, firms, or some like connectivity gap or something, excess cost to reach that.
So what would be like? We have defined like the problem. What would be your research question? Like, what do we want to validate through these experiments?
You're going a little bit too far, I would say. So in terms of the too fast. Yeah, sorry, we'll get there. But what are so before thinking about the experiment, what it is? So what are the space of solutions that you could think about? So we are very often jump from we have a problem, we have a solution, let's evaluate the solution, and so just I guess a couple minutes of okay, you've identified a setting, a context, but if you have other settings, and then what are areas where you what would be changes that you like to do to the so don't think so much about what is experiment, but rather look, I have a program on women funders, and one of the challenges I have is whether I should be supporting them, I should be training them, or I should create some mentoring networks, or I should be whatever. Just so it's.
So do we want to ask why first, or do we just make some assumptions about what the challenge is?
You can do it both ways. My starting point with this is if you already have something that you are working on, that's the starting point. If you're not working on and you're picking one, then start with the why.
Well, I do have something I'm working on specifically on that. And so what we realized is that indigenous women, especially in rural areas of Guatemala, they are facing two major challenges. The first one is their knowledge of financial education, because they do not have access to that, and then the cultural norms regulating access to finance. So those are like the first two major.
Right, so I'm really seeing like gaps in how we strengthen our collaborators. Like, I don't know what
We're dealing with this right now too.
yeah, I was gonna say I don't know it's like Bloomington, but like because when I came into my role at the city, it was like anti-poverty work, but I'm seeing like similarities between like small businesses and other families and households.
Feel empowered enough to actually go and ask about these things. And then, of course, there's the lack of financial education, but it goes very tied with a narrative that tells them they should know how to work with money, but nobody's teaching them how to work with money. So they are ashamed because they don't know how to work with money, but nobody teaches them how to work with money. So this is this vicious cycle of kind of you don't deserve to be here, but you should know how to do it. But no, I'm not going to teach you, but I'm going to judge you if you don't know. Like they're constantly trapped in that. So what we
It's
are,
knowledge and stigma, confidence kind of issue.
yeah, I think it has to do with stigma most definitely, and it definitely affects their confidence. Like because they are expected to be experts in something that nobody's willing to teach them about, and it's not embedded in any way, shape, or form in our educational system. But at the same time, it's like if you go to a bank and you ask a question that may be considered silly or whatever, you're going to be judged very harshly. And so for them, we interviewed a bunch of women, and they were like, "Oh, I don't want to go near a bank because I went there and didn't feel welcome, or a cooperative even, which is supposed to be more welcome."
How are we strengthening that to help them?
Answered, or I was. It's a disaster for us. Or I have had so we're just college now.
Yeah.
I used to be there, and there's a lot of
It's like a vicious cycle.
yeah.
It's like you don't know financial stuff, then you go to the bank, then they make you feel dumb,
And you said there was a challenge on the other side. Was it regulation, you said?
Yes and no. Like, the regulatory landscape in Guatemala is a little bit, how do you say that? Complex. And the main reason for that is that it's not heavily regulated, which makes it easier to navigate in the gray areas that leaves open. For example, a lot of fintechs are operating in Guatemala right now, and they're all operating under the gray area. So they are not regulated, but they're also not protected under the law. So what they're doing is that they are kind of adhering themselves to the similar laws that the banks have, so that way they cannot be apprehended or they do not commit a crime when they're handling people's money. But there's not a lot of regulation for that either. So I don't think specifically for rural women, regulations have a huge impact. That being said, the government is promoting like very specific affirmative actions in which they are working, how do you say finanzas de segundo piso? Sorry, what is it? Segundo piso? Like second floor? I don't know if the translation is similar. Second tier, kind of like that. Second tier finance, where the government is loaning money to cooperatives for them to allocate money on female founders that respond to this profile. Young, women, indigenous, rural areas. So that is a solution the government is already implementing. However, they are just doing it
that's like, I would say, issue like ecosystem builders at home. It's like strengthening the collaboration muscle. We have a lot of meetings, but it don't seem like, yeah.
So next step is to write it up. What's the problem and the solutions that you are thinking about? You want things. You have a problem, and I don't want a solution, but I want ideas of things that could be done to address this. And it could be a problem or an opportunity. I mean, there's the other way. It's like, we have AI and whatever. That's the.
I'm an outsider. I can say anything I want.
Should we assume they have access to the internet?
So, this is a fun fact. Guatemala has more smartphones than people. So, we are around 17 million smartphones. We are around 22 million. And ask me why, we have a lot of them. And the reason for that is that a lot of people kind of have a work phone and a personal phone, and they kind of don't mix both. And then another reason is remittances. So a lot of people have families working in the U.S. and they get sent like phones as part of their kind of remittances income, or they buy phones. So we do have a lot of smartphones.
Why aren't we working together to
years ago in terms of reach. Now we do have an infrastructure in which you can have access to data anywhere in the country, like even in the middle of nowhere. However, if you are a person who does not have a cellular plan, which is very common, especially in rural areas, you're likely not going to be able to purchase it to have kind of continuous connectivity. So what people do is that they buy these internet packages, which you pay like 5 quetzales, which is less of $1, to have some gigabytes of connection that lasts you for the day. And so they purchase it when they need it, but it's not like they have all the time access to the internet.
Is there also an issue of language and security?
I didn't know that.
21 of them are Mayan, which makes it even more complicated. And then we have Spanish, which is the official language, and that adds another layer of complexity because like everything on the public service industry, and even in the banking service.
Take for example, like for us, housing.
Yeah.
Where everybody's like, well, this is just a little bit of what we do, and it's like you can't. The problem is much larger than like you're focused on all these other things. And that, yeah. So we were just talking about how the problem a lot of times is like people know that we need to build ecosystems together, and we have limited resources. It's easy to identify the problems, but and you were saying like how the way you put it was like building your collaborative muscles.
Oh yeah.
So how do you be? How do you,
capitalist system. And so they kind of had to translate that.
Is it okay? So we've talked a little bit. You have solutions in here written. You have some ideas that you've been kind of talking about. Part of idea is for starting with putting ourselves in the context, in an issue, and looking at different options. The second stage of the process that we are not going to do, but I'm just going to talk about it, is when you're doing this, in a real problem is assessing the data, the evidence, and the theory of change. So let me start with an example that will resonate with some of you, which is rather than jumping directly to solution, let's look at the evidence. One of our government partners had a challenge, which was to saying very few organizations, very few women-led businesses were getting access to their innovation funding. That's probably a shared challenge around the world. And and the first thing, but they hadn't really looked at the data. So the first thing that they did, what we did with them, was to say, are we actually we have applications? Are we losing people through the application process? So is the application more difficult for women? It was not the case. The second bit that they said is actually, are we being harsher when is this innovation agency being harsher when they are scoring women-led proposals relative to men-led proposals? And they compare the distribution of scores by gender, and they also kind of saw that there was no difference. Then they said, actually, are we sharing information equally with men and women-led? And they looked at the newsletter, and they realized that they had only a quarter of the subscribers to the newsletter of the funding organization were women. So actually, unless we broaden the pipeline, there is nothing that we're not going to go very far. Then here you can sort of say, okay, the answer is let's get lots of women in the newsletter. But really, it's important to understand the context and what's the theory of change. So if I get lots of women in the newsletter, will that solve the problem? Or maybe the problem is that there are not enough women that are kind of PIs or that are eligible, that are even one step earlier. So, and here is where the theory of change really helps you. We typically think about programs as starting with, an outcome that we want, and then we'll do something, and then, hopefully that magic will work. It's, it's the, the other way to do it is to look at this is to say, there is a need, there is a long-term outcome, the program will fix it, but not really getting into how it will do it. So the idea of the theory of change is to and we're not going to do this for now because we don't have time, and this will be a full-day workshop, but is to think about what it is that you want to do, what's the outcome that you're looking for, and then what are the activities, and crucially, what are the assumptions and the causal chain in the different steps. Whenever we do workshops with governments on the theory of change, people come in with a solution, and they leave out with a different one. Because it basically forces you to challenge and say, okay, I'm assuming that let's pick up, here you have an example of access to credit for women, indigenous entrepreneurs in rural areas in Guatemala. And one of the solutions, let's say it's female loan officers in banks it may be, that could be your theory of change. In that case, so that could be, that could be the assumption that, and I'm just making this up, so maybe I'm misreading the context, just to be, that the more female, that women don't go to the banks because they have men, and with men they don't resonate as much, and women will understand, they will feel more comfortable having this relationship. And that could be the case. It might well be that the issue is actually that there are not enough women entrepreneurs to even go into the bank. Or that the issue is not, or that actually women are already going to the banks, but they are not getting credit because they don't have the right information. So the theory of change is really thinking very careful about the outcome you want to achieve and the assumptions, and how your activities will affect, will lead you there, and also identify your unknowns. Now, I just made a lot of hypotheses about, could it be, okay, let's check it. Do women go into the banks? Yes, no. Why do they go to the banks? Yes, for this, for that. I don't know. And it really forces you to think very granularly about and be explicit about the implicit assumptions. And when you do that, very often you realize that your solution is a great solution for another problem, but not for the problem that you really cared about. So I know what you basically want, just to summarize on this, is to avoid building a bridge to nowhere when actually a boat would be a better solution to cross the ocean. That sounds trivial, but you'd be surprised how many organizations get in love. I think you were talking about problems here. Get in love with the problem, not with the solution. That's the main idea. So, for the last few minutes of the, let's see how we're running out of time, it'd be great to actually convert one of your solutions into an experiment. And this is just a thought experiment. And here, when you're thinking about an experiment, it's like you need to define what's the research question. What do you want to test? And here's an example of a bad one and a good one. A bad one is to say, how can we encourage SMEs to make more use of digital technologies? That's a very important question. That's a very interesting question. That's the kind of question that you should be asking at the beginning. But when you're getting to the point of designing the experiment, the question needs to be much more specific. If I look at the small businesses of this size in the UK, does giving them information about the technologies that are available will lead to greater adoption of digital technologies compared with not informing them about it. So you are being very clear about what's the population, who are you targeting, who is intervention targeting, and be very explicit about it. You are also being very clear about what is the intervention. You are also being very clear about what is the outcome. We want them to adopt the technologies. And you're also being very clear what's the control. There will be some companies that will not get this information. So, another way of thinking, we call this, I'm not sure many other people, the PICO approach, which is to say, identify the population that you are targeting, then, be very explicit about what the intervention is. And the intervention is, we'll give business support, we'll do that and that. Then, think about where you'll have one or two interventions, and what will be the control, another intervention, or the status quo, and then how you're going to what it is that you would like to measure to see whether intervention is successful. So, yeah, what we're going to do now is, I'll remind you, we have here kind of two pieces of paper, and really, let me go back, to just finish by doing this for one of the solutions here and one of the solutions that we were talking here. So, make a whiteboard, and pick a solution and say, or multiple solutions, and how would you actually go and test that?